Hello everyone, thank you for spending a little time with us today. We have our webinar today, 8 Ways Alcohol Brands Drive Sales with Influencer Marketing. Those of you in alcohol sales and marketing know it's a little bit different than most other kinds, so we will share the best practices, and we will share the watch outs for you as well as we go through this. So with that, let's jump into a little bit of housekeeping. And first of all, I want to let you know that we hope you can have plenty of questions. There is a little questions box on your GoToWebinar panel, as you can see on this slide right here. Just whenever you think of them, go ahead and fire away. We'll be happy to answer as many as we can. We may get to them all at the end. Frankly, if I don't notice them till the end, we'll take them at the end. If I notice one popping up that's particularly relevant, I will jump in right away. We are recording this as well. Everyone will get a copy of that if that impacts how you take notes. Feel free to know that that is coming. And if you prefer to use Twitter to tweet at us, we are watching at Carusele, and hashtag influencer webinar is another way to get our attention. So with that, you're probably wondering who you're talking to today. My name is Jim Tobin. I'm the boy in this group. Amanda is also with us today. I am president of a company called Carusele. I also founded a company called Ignite Social Media back in 2007, which is still working today with a number of large household name brands on social media marketing. Carusele is a company we spun out of Ignite in 2015, which does influencer marketing specifically with a little bit of a different take on it. I've also written a couple books on social media marketing, and like Amanda, worked with a fair number of well-known brands. Amanda is our Senior Campaign Strategist. That means she actually designs the programs, many of which you'll see today. So she's designed programs for Walgreens and Target and Pepsi and a lot of brands you see there, and many, many, many more. So she's really, really good at figuring out how to get that interchange between what a brand wants to say and what the influencer likes to talk about. So we've done a fair number of these, and hopefully it is helpful as we go. So we've divided this into two parts. One is the watch outs. That comes first. We have 3 overarching watch outs. And then we end on the happier stuff, which is the positive things that you can look forward to doing as you do influencer marketing. So I will start with a couple of watch outs. And I think the first one, which is true of pretty much any brand getting into influencer marketing these days, is to make sure that you're FTC compliant. Now, this is fairly well known by most marketers now, but it is evolving fairly quickly. This letter went out to about 90 influencers the FTC felt were in violation probably about 7 or 8 weeks ago now. And they made their messaging a little more clear. The FTC has been very good, in my view, at being clear of what they want from influencer marketing. And as people get cued and try to work around it, they're getting more direct about what they want here. But the overall messaging has been clear and consistent. And that's really encapsulated in this first bullet here. If there is a material connection between the person writing the endorsement and the marketer of the product, you got to tell people about it. And that material connection can be any sort of thing that might affect the weight or credibility that a consumer should give the endorsement if they knew about it. This could be you're married to the person. It could be obviously gave them free product. It could be payment, of course, anything. So its material connection is fairly broad, but pretty clear. Are they completely unbiased? If not, you should disclose it. So whenever we write about a client, even if it's not a program we particularly worked on, we use hashtag client to make sure somebody knows that we have a material connection between with the marketers of this product and ourselves. The other thing that's more new, is this material connection must be disclosed before the more button. And you cannot hide your links and your hashtags and bury them where people aren't going to see them. So Amanda will share a few examples of that very specifically on this slide.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. So we really like what the FTC is doing right now, because what it's telling us is they're showing that they not only know about these social channels, but they're really paying attention to them. They're paying attention to these platforms, and because they're increasingly becoming more and more powerful tools to reach consumers, and they're really working to convert and drive sales. So as Jim mentioned a couple of minutes ago, that about 7 or 8 weeks ago, the FTC called these out, these sort of, if you will, cryptic attempts that influencers have been using to disclose their partnerships. And these terms or these hashtags have just been deemed a little too vague for acceptable disclosure. And it's getting a lot of attention because this because these social channels and these influencers specifically are really, really important for advertising and marketing. And it's just getting a lot more attention. So as you can see here on these slides right here, they're using the hashtag SP or partner, or simply posting thanks brand. And these are a don't per the FTC. But if you can go to the next slide, all these posts clearly and conspicuously state that this is a paid advertisement by a brand, or you know, that direct solicitation from someone that has that material investment in the brand or the product. So a couple of the influencers posted the hashtag ad clearly outside the rest of her copy, and it's not clumped in a group of 10 or more hashtags or under the more sign, which Jim mentioned, where it might not be regarded by her readers. So So to recap that, kind of these good and abiding hashtags per the FTC are hashtag sponsored, hashtag paid, or as you see in these posts, hashtag ad. And then for some of those that are not qualified as acceptable are hashtag SP, hashtag spawn, or partner. And then we provide just a little cheat sheet for you guys at the bottom here, and because it's not only about what the hashtag are, but it's about the placement as well, and it's just really important to note in all of your social posts.
So we're getting more specific. These are our examples here of what we put in our documents to our influencers. This is a campaign we ran here, but the overarching guidance has been very, very consistent. So if you stay with that, you're unlikely to be the example that the FTC is going to make of some brand, I think certainly in the next 6 months. The next watch out that I'm putting in here, we put in here, is that budgets are on the rise. Now, that is not ordinarily a watch out. It's usually a great thing that budgets are on the rise. But I want to point out a couple things. Number one, alcoholic beverages are having luck with influencer marketing in terms of reporting back the volume of earned media they're getting from influencer marketing per dollar invested. Alcoholic beverages is doing very well. CPG food is number one, but alcoholic beverages is very, very strong. So it is working, and in part because of that, about 48% of marketers say they're going to increase their influencer marketing budget, and about 4% are going to decrease it. That's all great, except like in any industry that's getting credibility, that's getting budgets put toward it, costs rise. And so you see here there's a 250% increase in influencer fees year over year per post. And that's just, we're seeing that recently. We saw another spike again just about 60, 90 days ago, where there are some articles about influencers making a lot of money, and all of a sudden all of the influencers we deal with, we're charging more. So there is a little give and take. There's a fairly large supply of influencers. There's a much smaller supply of really good influencers. So these budgets mean that if you're going out to do influencer marketing, number one, you have to have a budget. Number two, you have to have an idea of what you're going to expect to pay, because these rates are getting more normalized and more consistent, and free product is not compensation anymore, hasn't been compensation for probably at least 5 years. But when people talk to us about budgets, one of the things we say is, I can't tell any given brand what their budget should be for any kind of marketing, but what we can say is that you should treat this like any other sort of media investment you're making. You wouldn't expect huge sales from a $10,000 media investment. You're not going to get huge sales from a $10,000 influencer program, but you know, 50,000, 100,000, we are seeing sales lift there. But you really need to have your budget set because the market's maturing a little bit. The other watch out that we have in here is that you're not buying ad space, and this theme will come up a couple times during this presentation today. The nice part about influencer marketing is that with ad blocking software getting increasingly prevalent, more and more browsers, I think Safari is going to come with some defaults, tracking blocking. Opera already blocks ads out of the box. So it's harder and harder to get the ads through. And on the nice side as well is you get a lot of good content creation in the cost of influencer marketing, but influencers themselves don't do necessarily exactly what the brand wants them to do. So not only you've got the ad blocking to watch out for, but you don't have the full creative control that you would on sort of normal other marketing. That impacts alcohol in particular as a regulated industry, but it also impacts everybody as they're doing this. And I think, as I said, you'll see this come up multiple times during this conversation we're having here.
Yep, so that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about next, and that's your messaging. And it's really, really important to any influencer campaign, but particularly for alcohol brands, is that messaging and how you train your influencers to talk about your brand or product. So this kind of message training, if you will, it can be done in a variety of ways. The way we do it is with a welcome packet, which is what you can see on the screen right here. This document can be used as a really thorough way to educate your influencers on both the brand and what your particular product is all about and why it benefits them and their readers. So we'll typically start with a creative theme or sort of an inspirational mantra and get that cemented in their heads to kind of get the creative juices flowing as they start thinking about what type of customized content they want to create. And then from there, we'll move into the more granular details and specific watch outs. So moving down the page, you can see that some of the other information that we have in here are important dates, their campaign dates, a specific influencer's published dates, etc. And next, we'll lay out some product details along with images of your package. And this is great because when they're in the store picking up the product, we want them to be able to see the exact product and the packaging that it comes in, any particular flavors or the package sizes that they need to focus on, whether it's a 6-pack or just a large bottle, whatever it may be. And then moving down from there, that's when we want to start laying out the guardrails of the product, the brand, and your campaign, along with the messaging and those brand guidelines that are specific to your brand. So we'll unpack this for you because all of these are really important, the messaging of your brand, product, and campaign. Let's say, for instance, that you are a sustainable wine brand and you want to run a summer program around a product launch of maybe a new sparkling wine line. And so you'll need to determine how strongly you want to make the connection to your brand and the portfolio of sustainable products that you offer, because it could be great for your brand, but it could also take away from your new launch and what's special about that new product, specifically the sparkling wine. And then what's the messaging of the product? Is it lifestyle-focused messaging, or is it really granular messaging about the sustainable growth and the kind of practice that you use in creating the wine? And then finally, the campaign itself. Do you want a summer campaign focused around maybe outdoor leisure and sharing it with friends, or do you want the campaign to position the wine around more food pairing and recipes? And this is going to determine what types of influencers you work with. So, so anyway, you're the brand, you're paying for the sponsored content, and if there's a way that you want your product portrayed, then this should all go in the welcome packet, and it's part of the influencer's contract with you to follow these guidelines. And so another big piece here that goes into our welcome packet and is important that our influencers know is that while an influencer is expected to know and understand the FTC rules and those guidelines that Jim was discussing earlier, they can't necessarily be expected to know the rules or nuances that are specific to your industry. So we just want to lay out a couple examples for you. The 71.6% rule, which is the amount of audience that needs to be above the legal drinking age, and the influencers themselves need to be 25 plus. And also note that influencer content will need to be reviewed and approved prior to posting for this reason. Any influencer-hosted UGC activations, that content must be monitored and regulated as well. Of course, alcohol shipping across state lines, any discounts and promotions, any kind of stipulations around that typically vary by state. So while understanding where your brand and industry stand on these are really important, along with ensuring that influencers know that it is really important how your product is portrayed in images. Even if they're not typing or saying something specific necessarily, it may come across in a certain way visually. So to avoid that, go ahead and educate them on the do's and don'ts that are relevant to your brand. The examples here, such as creating an imagery that portrays heavy drinking or maybe partying, or even using an image that that might entice a person that's 21 years or younger.
One of the examples we had with one of our alcohol campaigns, the person was simply holding a beer, and in the background there were some empty beers in the background, about 5 of them, which in a setting with 30 people is not a big deal, but the image only had a single hand. So in that case, we reworked that image to be extra safe. And with the industry guidelines being voluntary as they are, most of our alcohol clients are very much erring on let's not be fast or cute with these rules. So but you made it through the watch-out, so congratulations there. And now we'll flip over into the best practices for doing these sort of programs. Number one, I think, is we've got it portrayed here with sort of an amusing comic, if you will, with this imagery right here. But the point to be made is that so much influencer marketing right now is focused on the influencer versus influence. And so while it's jokingly here about a YouTube star who's 12 promoting mortgages, to me, it's really about the power of the messages that are being created. Are they inspirational or are they aspirational? Do you look at them and say, I want to do that, and if I want to do that, I need to buy this? Or do you just do it because influencer Nick or influencer Susie told you so? I think it's more of the latter. And so one of the theories that we ascribe to is getting influencers from what we call here the power middle. So they're people with followings of 10,000 to 1 million, maybe 5 million followers. They're not the big giant social celebrities, the PewDiePies of the world, the Kardashians of the world. And there's a couple reasons for this. We've been doing social media for a decade now. As of last week, it'll have been open for a decade. But we found that as size of following goes up, engagement rate goes down. And so with influencer marketing, to get some of these celebrities, real celebrities or sort of social celebrities, the amount you pay, the hockey stick of cost, just goes through the roof at these higher followings, and they tend to be much more contractually oriented. You ask for 3 tweets, you get 3 tweets. What we find in the power middle is that people get excited, and we ask for 3 or 4 images, and they create 7 because they were out having a good time, or they made this recipe, or they did whatever. Well, why not take some extra shots? So extra photography, not extra shots. So we tend to get more than we contract for. Occasionally we'll use content specialists with 1,000 to 10,000 followers when that makes sense. And so these are actually all content from our earlier programs in the background. I think you can see the sort of quality that this power middle creates. We did use a stop motion photographer with makes movies from stop motion, relatively small social following for a program we did for Walgreens, in part because we knew we could manufacture reach, but you can't manufacture as easily passion, high quality content, those sort of things. So once we had that stop motion photography, it was relatively easy to get other influencers to share it and to media target it and do all those things. So living in the power middle, I think, is a good place to be.
Yeah, and something to note on that as well is that they typically haven't worked or done as much sponsored content as the past as some of these top celebrity type influencers. And so we found that sometimes we've introduced influencers to particular brands, and they've kind of organically become advocates for this brand even long after the campaign has ended. And as Jim mentioned, that usually results in more content that's totally out of their scope of work that we contracted them for, and it really provides a nice opportunity for us to continue working with them and their advocacy to grow.
So tell us how you pick your influencers, Amanda, since that's a big part of your job.
Yeah. So here, Jim mentioned earlier, the best way to ensure that we're able to get the most reach and kind of manufacture that reach is first by finding the right influencers. And we'll start by saying that, continue to reach out and grow your network, but also ensure that you're nurturing the relationships that you currently have. Again, speaking to the advocacy portion, here at Carusele, we embrace sort of a network building approach to our influencer marketing. And, we make sure that we continue to keep in touch with all of our influential contacts, even after a campaign has ended, or by working with them on multiple campaigns throughout the year. And that's proven really successful for us. So, we kind of take a unique approach to finding and vetting influencers. And one thing that we'll often ask a brand when we're getting briefed is, what are your audience insights? If you can give me a breakdown of the detailed audience data that breaks down geography, demographics, maybe the purchase behavior or the type of content that they're consuming and where. Is it videos? Is it long form blog posts? Anything on YouTube? Are they spending a lot of their time? Any insights into those interests and digital habits? This information will not only help you determine what type of influencer to contract for your brand and this particular campaign, but it allows you to take a step further and reach consumers that are likely going to be interested in your brand and kind of drive those first-time users. So we'll use the sparkling wine brand again for an example. You shouldn't just look for influencers that love wine. You certainly want that for authenticity purposes, those that like and drink wine. But we also want to understand who their audience is. Is the audience of this wine someone that's on the go and maybe a young professional or a city dweller, or is it an empty nester that maybe drinks Trulies or Smirnoffs on her deck, and you want them to convert them to your product? So your campaign messaging might be that this wine is for the mature palate, and kind of knowing this background information of who your audience is and is consuming will help you determine what types of influencers to work with. And it's also worth noting the importance of matching your target platform to your audience and your objectives specific to your campaign. This is something that we work closely with brands and influencers to do while we're building that strategy because it's going to be dependent on both who the audience is and then what you're looking to do. So for instance, say if you're targeting millennials, maybe 21 to 32, for example, you might automatically assume that Instagram and Snapchat are your go-to social channels. But if the objective of your campaign is to drive clicks to your website, then neither of those are necessarily going to be the best platform for you to put your content on. You can certainly do it and have the influencers add your website link to their bio, but it's going to be short-lived and kind of creating an extra step for their readers. So you might want to stay away from that. Another consideration is the nature of your program. And if you're looking for a campaign focused on food pairing or cocktail recipes, then you might want to drive them to long-form blog posts and publish those across Pinterest, because that's where that content kind of performs the best. And then lastly, diversify with tiers. And what you're thinking about is who's going to be working to create your content. Like we said, you can manufacture great reach, but you can't necessarily manufacture great content. So here, that middle group here is what Jim was talking about, that power middle. And you always want to work with that group of folks. But in tandem, you might want to begin building this network of brand advocates. And while you're vetting, these guys might not have the biggest social following. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the point is that they can bring a passion to your brand. They can really connect to your product. And that's whether you've worked with them in the past or they're just super familiar with your brand because it's a product that they already use and love and are just so excited to partner with you on it. And these guys put a passion behind their content creation. And with that passion comes credibility to their audience. And once they've created it, then you can work on your amplification plan to get it in front of your target audience. And then lastly, at the top here are your content creators. And these guys are just amazing photographers, videographers, stop motion, and they do it in a way that really is going to fit the aesthetic of your brand. So if you find someone like that you want to work with, and again, maybe the numbers aren't there, but in that case, it's all about content creation, and that spreads organically because people love beautiful photos or they love an engaging video because it's so share-worthy. And finally, what we mentioned here is to balance direction with creative freedom. So we want to give influencers that creative freedom, and it's so true because it really allows for more engaged influencers and authentic content. And this is data from a survey of influencers, and you can see that one thing, over 3/4 or actually 77% of influencers responded that the #1 factor that makes U.S. influencers likely to work with the brand more than once is that creative freedom. And don't get me wrong, being compensated was a close second, but I was really excited to see a piece of data that reinforces my advocacy and Carusele's advocacy of a creative influencer marketing strategy that focuses on the influencer strengths of each individual influencer and allows them to create content that's going to really resonate with their audience because they know them best. And anyway, we want to share here some guardrails around having that creative freedom. We gave some examples in the welcome packet earlier, but here's just a checklist that you can use to loop in the influencer with enough information that they have the creative freedom they want, but also make sure that they don't come back with content that doesn't really support the message of your brand, or maybe it lacks the aesthetic that the brand was looking for in the visual content. So any important dates, product imagery, key messages, anything like that are the types of stuff that you will want to put in a welcome packet, or just a very concise document that's short and sweet and kind of relays everything that you need it to. And we just wanted to share some content examples. This is a campaign of Apothic wine that we did, and we worked with influencers to provide guardrails around, again, both the messaging of the product and then the aesthetic that we wanted to drive, and worked with them to create specific stories that were, really custom to them, that would resonate with their audience the best. And you can see that that one influencer did a wine pairing, another hosted a dinner party and served the wine, another had a glass to relax, and while she was kind of getting ready for an evening out. The possibilities are endless, but the point is that you really allow the influencer to do what's going to work best for them.
And in this case, the campaign theme that they were using overall for the relaunch of Apothic White was a white with dark intentions, which I thought was a nice little theme for them coming back to market. So you see how this influencer took it and did a black and white party, so she could really bring that theme to life of a white wine with dark intentions. And what I like about this section that Amanda just went over is that we talked about creative freedom, and then we talked about guardrails. And there's another webinar on our website on the resources section that if you care to listen, it's available to you. The influencers who we talked with said it's very frustrating when they're not given creative freedom. It's even more frustrating when they start out with what appears to be creative freedom. They create the content, and then the brand comes back and says, no, I wanted you to talk more about this aspect. And so, the balance that Amanda's talking about here is very, very important. So talk about, Amanda, how we get this content from just to the influencers and the influencers' audience beyond that.
Yep. So once you have that great content, then you can consider ways to amplify it. And with the right plan, the content, if you will, can almost be recycled so you can make it more effective for you. And if you're working with good content to begin with, then people are more likely to share and engage with that content. So here's just a couple examples that we look at. One approach that we take is we think how can we reach as much of our target audience as possible without that enormous expense of having each influencer create content on their own. Maybe they're working with an expensive photographer and they post it on their own social channels. It can get quite expensive and time-consuming for both the brand and the influencers to look at all this content, review it, and whatnot. So our solution is to enlist a second wave of influencers during the second portion of the campaign. And these influencers are going to be like-minded and also align with your brand. And we take into consideration those same audience insights that we discussed earlier. And we work with them to share content that has already been created, is high-performing organically, and they can share that across their social channels. The example we have here is this one influencer named Celeste. She called out a piece of content from New York City Pretty, thanking her for introducing her to the Walgreens app, working in those same key messages that the original influencer did, as well as those FTC guidelines. Secondly, once you, once you've already created some nice relationships with your influencers, this can really only work when you have those relationships, because it's a bit difficult because it requires an influencer to share their Instagram username and password with your team in order for you to get in and put media dollars behind the content. But once done, it's a really, really effective way at boosting the best performing content. And that's kind of centric to our organic approach here at Carusele, because we're able to boost content that's already performing and doing well in very, very targeted ways. Third is a type of media placement, and it's pretty unique. It's similar to, we also do native advertising, but in this case we use influencer content to create a feature story. So it's kind of similar to traditional PR, but we're pulling in influencer content to create this story, and then it's published across hundreds, if not thousands, of local print and digital media outlets across the country. And it's a nice way of going after a slightly older demographic and allows us an even broader reach outside of the social channels using the influencer content in kind of a more traditional sense. And then finally, another approach that we'll take is social activations. And this can be activated across any social channel, really, whichever is deemed most appropriate for your campaign. So the objective of social activations is to engage your audience and further amplify the content, and even in some cases add to an existing layer of content. So the example we've used here is a UGC activation across Instagram that highlighted existing influencer content as sort of prompts to encourage their followers and then the people within their network to create a piece of content that contributes the activation. And the incentive is often to win a type of customized prize. People get really excited about it, and again, it just adds more awareness to your campaign and then more content for you to be able to use after the campaign's over, which will lead us directly into this next slide.
Actually, just before we do that real quickly, I wanted to just mention that I was thinking we haven't ever added up how many pieces of content we've created, but I'm doing some quick math in my head. I know it's over 50,000 pieces of content in the last 2 years. So one of the things we've learned is that not all content is created equal. You'll probably have somewhere between 10 and 20% of that content being really, really good. And good meaning it's getting good reach, it's getting good engagement, people are commenting, they're sharing it. And those are the pieces of content that you should really leverage. Those are the pieces of content that are going to do very well. And in social media, which is different than any other sort of kind of advertising, you can actually syndicate high-performing content cheaper than syndicating content that isn't as good. So knowing which pieces of content to amplify is part of a good amplification strategy as well.
Great point, Jim. Yeah, and once you have all this content, really consider ways that you can leverage it. It's a nice best practice for brands during a campaign to engage with the influencer content as it's going live, maybe commenting on it or retweeting the content. But you can really take it a step further if you've worked out the proper licensing agreement up front with your influencers, and you can reuse this content long after a campaign is over. Here's just a few examples here. We have a billboard in Times Square after a beauty campaign that we ran with Revlon, and they had some space on a Times Square billboard, ended up using a piece of influencer campaign, and told us after the fact that it saved them tens of thousands of dollars rather than having a new piece created just for this, this advertising activation. Here's in the top center is a photo from a 2015 Red Nose Day program. It showed up at the People's Choice Awards while some folks were giving their speeches on a website. That's our influencer at the top doing that handstand. Walgreens used an image of an influencer and a quote from her in their spring photo catalog, which was in stores for about 3 months. And there's all sorts of different ways that you can use it, and we're happy to talk with you more about that.
All right, so we have reached the point where you've gotten your watch outs and you've gotten your best practices for influencer. Reminder that the screen has a questions thing on there, a little questions pop out. If you can hit us up with any questions you have. We have received a couple here, so we'll jump in on those. The first one, I'll take this first one, is what are the different ways you're measuring success of influencer programs? That's an excellent question, and I think We have a little white paper I'm happy to send anyone who wants it, or you can find it on our website, of 6 different ways to measure influencer marketing. But I think the most important thing to start out with is to decide which of those 6 ways, or what way are you going to measure this to know if it's successful, because influencer is kind of a buzzword right now, and a lot of people are throwing some money at it. There's a lot of different people taking different approaches to it, and really, is it moving the needle? So the number one way to measure it is direct sales lift studies. Those can cost a fair amount of money if you use somebody like Nielsen Catalina, in part because you have to have a wide enough breadth of content and audience to measure for that statistical significance. The next best is correlated sales lift. So we ran this program, we used influencer. Otherwise, it was the same program we ran last quarter or the same time last year. However, many ways you can get the control to match the test, and then our sales went up more, our sales went up less, our sales went up the same. Those sorts of things are important for direct sales lift, and we've seen that many times with brands coming back and saying, yep, we can see the sales lift after these programs. If you can't do that, other ways include looking at your share of voice. Share of voice is highly correlated with sales lift. Looking at the cost of the content being produced and where you can do it elsewhere is sort of a savings. And then really an efficiency model. Most brands we work with don't have unlimited budgets. So if you do, would love to talk to you. So you've got to decide, am I putting this money in influencer? Am I putting it here? Am I putting it here? Am I putting it here? And so what's working best is the question more than what's working. And so among the ways to do that is the CPM, the cost per 1,000 impressions, versus other ways you can do it. The CPE, the cost per engagement, how much does it cost to get somebody to react to my content? CPC, cost to click to a website. Those sort of things you can do comparatively to the other places you can spend money. Those are some of the ways you can measure the success of your influencer programs. So in a nutshell, if you're investing money in them, I think we're a little bit beyond experimental now, and it's time to start expecting some results. So the next question, I'm gonna let you take this, Amanda, and that's, what are the best tools to use to find influencers?
Sure. So we have a database that we use to kind of vet influencers, but we've really amassed this nice network of influencers almost manually over the past few years. We're constantly growing it, but as I mentioned before, we always want to work to nurture those relationships that we already have, kind of expand them, use these influencers in different ways because they are performing great for us and for our clients and brands as well. I will say that again, knowing those audience insights would be the first step in knowing what type of influencer to work with, and then kind of scaling your database and digging in a little bit more from there.
Okay. We've got one more question, and we have time for it, so we'll finish up with this question, which is, what could be the next big thing the FTC cracks down on? So I'll start, and Amanda, you can round it out. To me, I think they've been very measured in their responses. Hey, this probably wasn't okay. I think they're going to look for a brand or two to make a true example of. It's happened a little bit with Lord & Taylor and the dress marketing that they did, where all the influencers posted a picture of the same dress and didn't disclose that. That got a little bit of a hand slap, but I think those slaps are going to be a bit stronger in the short term. I think they're going to look for somebody to make a more visible example of, because the industry is not responding strongly enough. There's still too much sort of nonsense going on out there, I think, for their liking. I think long term, so that's in the next 6 months, I would expect that to happen. I think not for a while, but maybe 2 years from now, they're going to crack down on brands basically ghostwriting for the influencer. If the influencer discloses and says, I was paid, but all opinions are my own, they're going to say, this clearly, you all wrote the same thing. This was clearly written by the brand. That disclosure wasn't true. And they'll probably start with a gentler hand slap to that too. But that's a secondary thing. I don't think they're in their sort of hierarchy of needs. They're there next. But I don't think they're going to spend as much time on the influencers, Amanda. I don't know what you think, as they are the brands.
Yeah, well, I would say in terms of the influencer content and what we were talking with you guys a bit earlier about, you know, allowing enough creative freedom, but also educating your influencers on any industry nuances that are within your industry and then specific to your brand too, because it's going to start becoming not only about their copy and the use of the appropriate hashtags. It's going to be, does their content itself, does the visual content align with these guidelines as well? And so kind of, you know, training them and educating them on what their visual content needs to look like is going to become something that they put their eyes on. Probably not even, I would say, definitely not in the next 6 months, but it will be down the line.
All right, some predictions. 3 watch outs, 5 best practices, and 2 predictions. What a fun-filled hour. So with that, I just want to say thank you all for spending time. As promised, we will send you the recording of this. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We do this all day, and I'm just happy to answer a question if you have one. And we will go from there, give you a few minutes left back in your day from the hour, and I hope you found it worthwhile. Again, do reach out. We're at Carusele, CARUSELE.com anytime. Amanda, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks, Jim.
And with that, we'll conclude the webinar. Thanks, everyone.